Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a video series or a podcast containing a series of conversations between myself, Mike Hutchinson, a designer and developer of miniature games, and this chap, Glenn Ford, also a designer and developer of tabletop games, including miniature games. We are embarked upon a series of discussions here on the channel about Kickstarter. This is actually something that we've planned to, we trailed talking about for a while, but I am making my first stumbling steps towards a Kickstarter in here this new year. Glenn is an old hand at Kickstarter, having successfully fulfilled a number of them. The number is higher than at half a dozen, I think, at this point.
A bit, yeah. I
And he's
think
planning to
seven.
probably do more this year.
That
So
was
we were talking last week about the sort of generalities of like, what game am I taking to Kickstarter? The answer is Space Gits. When am I taking it to Kickstarter? The answer is sort of Q1 of this year. Um, and sort of what are some of the general considerations about why Kickstarter and how Kickstarter and when. Anyway, so in this discussion, I want to talk a little bit more about the things that I have been kind of initially researching and getting stuck into. And these are like questions about manufacturing, questions about shipping and fulfillment, and questions about pledge managers. I think those are the three things that I'll end up talking about a little bit. We'll avoid some of the like running the Kickstarter and marketing the Kickstarter, and we'll necessarily end up talking about some of the post Kickstarter stuff as it relates to the fulfillment and stuff. So let me go on a little side quest here. So I last year, in preparation for Dragon Meet, I made a set of physical zines, and I made them little PDF things, relatively cheaply constructed, and I got them printed locally in Canterbury here. And that was lovely, and they look cool, and they're sort of digitally printed, saddle stitched. And I was like, great, I want to sell these to people. So I looked into what it would take to set up an e-commerce thing on my website. And I have a WordPress website. And so I set up WooCommerce and broke a couple of download links on the website, and quickly got to the point where a couple of things became obvious. One was international shipping was really confusing, complicated, and expensive, and international taxes was weirdly unsupported by most platforms. Like, it's not just a thing that happens in e-commerce platforms. You have to go and do some work, or you have to go and pay some extra money for it. And so I started to sort of go, no, this is actually looking a lot more complicated to run a small little web store that I send little zines out to people than I was perhaps hoping. So I put a little pause on that, and instead I thought, well, let me go and focus on the Kickstarter. And I guess we'll get back to it at some point, but like, it turns out that the problems that you need to solve for Kickstarter are pretty much the same shape as e-commerce platform problems. And so some of these things that I'm going to do for the Kickstarter might end up solving my problem. And so I guess this was the first point, was that having made some books locally, which is a really cheap and easy way to do it, like I had stock and I didn't have to do anything complicated to make it. So when I launched the Kickstarter preview page, which I did in the start of December, something happened that I wasn't expecting, which Glenn probably could have told me to expect, which is that all kinds of people started emailing me with their services. Some of the services I didn't even know that category of service existed. Like, there was a company that said, we've got a massive email distribution list of Kickstarter fans. Would you like to, pay for an appearance in our newsletter? But one of the people that got in contact was a Chinese factory that I hadn't heard of. I had, already spoken to one factory at UKGE last year to sort of get together. So I will open, I guess, with the manufacturing question. So I started to think about, well, I've got this option of getting it printed locally. I've got these two factories that I spoke to. So I sent some technical specifications to the factory. That's when I spoke to them at UKG. I said, look, what do you need to kind of get this process started? And they basically said, look, just send us a relatively simple but completely clear description of what it is that your product is. Like, is it some books? Is there a box? How does the box open? What dimensions is the box roughly? Like, what components and thickness and so forth? So I sent some descriptions to these Chinese factories. And I also asked a question to my local printer, like, do you do hardback books? And how much would you charge me for 300 of them, and 500 and 1,000? And the quotes came back relatively similar, oddly enough. Like, about £1.50 for a hardback book, whether I get it printed in China or whether I get it printed in Canterbury. And to cut forward to a part of the story that's a few weeks later, I'm also now in contact with a few EU-based sort of book printer, and I haven't got the quotes back from them at the time of recording this, but I'm going to learn what hardback books cost to print in Lithuania and so forth. And so the considerations here I'm basically seeing are there's sort of two forks to this conversation topic. One is what is the considerations that go into picking the location of your manufacturing, and the other is how complicated to make the product.
Mm.
And that one spiders off into all kinds of shit. So I've got this. I've got this good position for Planet Smasher games, which is that like most of my games can just exist as a book. Like it's a miniatures game, so it can exist as a book. I have this sort of hope that they can exist as more than a book, because once I've got access to tokens and cards, like my game design space opens up a lot in a nice way. But as Hobgoblin proved, like when you supply a secondary, like a deck of cards as a secondary object, it's just a pain in the ass for everyone. And so if there's a box and you just get all the stuff in it, including the miniature rules and the cards and so forth, that would be great. And that's why I was thinking about Chinese manufacturing and getting things done. And in fact, like what I was thinking about with Space Gits is the way that you play Space Gits is you drop a load of bottle caps into the play area, and those become your loot tokens. So I literally have quotes for cardboard box with rulebook tokens and like 25 metal bottle caps, because they can, like in a nice Space Gits color with a Space Gits logo on it, because those guys can easily manufacture that. But paying £1.50 for a book in two different locations, like one of them is down the road and one of them is a like complicated intermodal shipping and getting stuck in the like canals through Egypt sort of a situation.
Yeah. I not when it got stuck, but I had stuff on that boat the journey it did after it got stuck.
Right.
Just randomly. I was doing a Kickstarter, and in the updates I was like, well, it's now on the boat, and I often put up the tracking information for the intermodal shipping on my Kickstarter for backers, and I put up the details of the ship, and someone went, isn't that the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal? And I looked up, I was like, yeah, that is the one that just got stuck in the Suez Canal. Hopefully he's the last
Lightning can't
person who's
strike
going to get
twice,
stuck a
surely.
second time. Now
Yeah.
he knows. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things going on there. Yeah, if you are just doing a book, and this is something that, like, wandering around Dragon Meat and talking to independent RPG designers and creators became very clear, is if you're doing a book, the margin over doing it in China versus doing it in the EU, doing it locally, is not a huge difference. And the fact that in any of those other locations you can set pretty much the size of print run you want, whereas in
Pretty
China
much, yeah.
it's going to be 1,000. It's often going to be
Or 1,500, yeah.
1,500 for a lot of creators, for a lot of the manufacturers. Is a big difference. As soon as you put in other thing, playing card, token, whatever else, I think that calculation swings way heavily towards China being just a significantly better on what they can provide, what they can do for you, and b the price being like I've been looking at reprinting.
Well, yeah. So for example here, so hardback book, £1.50. Hardback book in a box that fits it with a set of tokens and the 25 bottle caps, only a quid more.
Yeah, exactly. In China,
In China,
that is not going to be the case in the
yeah,
EU.
it would be like £10 more at least.
Yeah, I've been looking at reprinting some of the SSO expansion packs, because the numbers of the different print runs are going to run out at annoying times. And what would be like a $1.30, I think, to print in China is going to be over €5 to print in the EU for a deck of cards.
Right.
And not only that, but one of the things I found repeatedly with European and UK sort of game manufacturers is there's a whole bunch of things that you might think are fairly standard things for a game manufacturer to make, and you go to them and they go, well, we just can't do that. We just can't
Mm.
do that. We can't make that. Every time I've ever gone to Long Pack, whatever I've come up with, they're like, yeah, give us a week and we'll price that for you.
Yeah.
We'll find, they'll find, they'll produce, they'll source any mad thing that you come up with.
Mm.
Whereas like for EU professional game manufacturers, I've gone in sometimes and gone like, well, I want meeples, and they've gone, well, we don't do meeples, and it's
Mm.
like
Weird. Mm.
that feels like the sort of thing you should get on top of.
Mm.
I think that the thing with intermodal shipping is it's a pretty fixed price for however many numbers of game that you're going to produce. Unless you're doing like huge numbers, you're going to have like a pallet on intermodal shipping.
Mm.
And so, like, if you're doing 1,000 copies, that intermodal shipping is probably a relatively high cost per copy versus just printing in the UK and putting it on a truck. If you're printing 2,000 copies, if you're printing 5,000 copies, you're probably, certainly for a book, still only filling a pallet. And so it's
Mm.
still going to be pretty much, 1,000, for one pallet, whether you fill the pallet or not. And so these are the sorts of things that come into calculations of, is intermodal shipping actually going to kick me in the arse? To what degree is it going to kick me in the arse? Again, I put up a blog talking about how many pallets a game of a given size fills, because Christ knows for most people,
Yeah. And like, yeah, so yeah, it's another thing that you have to build some kind of weird spreadsheet model to figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like a slightly frustrating volume calculation with remainders and things.
Well, also it's like so Puke Apocalypse is been printed in China,
Mm.
and it's been it's an American customs apparently at the moment. And I was like, well, I'd like, obviously I want to order a few boxes of it, and I'd like it shipped, over to me. And they're like, well, this is how much it costs to air freight it. And I was like, well, could I have it not air freighted? I'm willing to wait the time for it to be overland shipping. And the response is, overland shipping is a pallet. You've got two boxes. It it will not reduce the cost to overland ship two boxes of books. It will be more expensive to overland ship it than to air freight it, because if we air freight it, it's going to cost x $100, whereas because we're going to ship literally those boxes, whereas
Mm.
the pallet is going to cost $1,000. It's going whether you've got two boxes sitting on that pallet in a container ship or not, you're still paying for the pallet. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
figuring out.
the general point here being that like uh just like manufacturing in China, the intermodal shipping from China is going to have a significant break point where the more you make, the better price you're getting, and if you're getting a small run, then it is astronomically expensive comparatively.
Absolutely. And again, there's no inherent reason other than like work to not budget different breakpoints and different solutions, and have really as
Mm.
many different solutions as you can handle the headspace for, of saying like, okay, well, look, if I can afford to print 2,000 or 3,000, China becomes a better option.
So at the risk of opening a box of bees that we can't easily shut again, I think the another thing about the decision that I'm making about whether to manufacture in China or not is about the insurance. So I started to talk to insurers. So this is not something that like you hear a lot about in Kickstarter, like the general Kickstarter enthusiasm discussions, but like um, when we had been talking about a potential Perilous Tales Kickstarter 4 years ago or whatever, you'd budgeted a line for insurance. And so having seen that, I went, oh yeah, I better go and investigate that. And so I Googled, I gamefully Googled, insurance for, game Kickstarters or whatever. And I've been speaking to a set of insurance brokers, and speaking to insurance brokers is good because you get someone who's knowledgeable about the general area, who doesn't work for a specific insurer, and so the conversations that I've had, they've been asking me questions about my business and what products I'm planning to make, and then they've been sort of offering some thoughts, not specifically advice with a capital A, but some thoughts about things to consider. And also the conversations that I've had so far have been wildly varied, like just
Mm.
ridiculously all over the map in terms of like the cost and the risk exposure and stuff. So in general, the insurance conversation is about how much risk I see as a creator beginning to put product into the world, specifically when it comes to the Chinese manufactured stuff. The two things that I'm thinking about that are making me kind of feel strongly that I will turn away from Chinese manufacturing for Space Gits is number one, the option or possibility of taking out marine insurance, which is
Mm.
essentially like insurance to say if the pallet never arrives, if it drops into the sea, or if it just disappears at one of the port exchanges, or it gets nicked or whatever happens, or damaged or whatever, you can get marine insurance. And in this situation, the quotes that I got varied from £300 to £10,000.
Mm.
It's like insanely different. But that's like, and one of the other insurers was like, "Oh no, you should ask the Chinese factory to insure the product all the way to the warehouse in UK." And I don't know whether that's anything that the factories that normally do board games, they might go, "Oh yes, of course, that's standard practice," or "No, we don't do that for anyone. That would be not monstrously expensive for us given the number of small creators we work with."
Yeah, no, they will do that. When you go through manufacturing, you'll come to a point and they'll give you different prices for different shipping options.
Hmm.
There'll be a price for it gets picked up from their factory. There'll be a price for it gets loaded onto a boat at a port, and there'll be a price for it turns up at your doorstep. And they'll price all of that in, and obviously they'll include their percentage on doing each of them, and how much of a headache do you want through the pandemic. So before, fairly anecdotal, prior to the pandemic, Longpack, who I print with, just did all the logistics of intermodal shipping and gave me a price, etc. They
Mm,
stopped being willing to do that during the pandemic because of all the shifts in shipping prices, and so I
mm,
started setting up my own logistics and intermodal shipping from the pandemic, and I just continued doing that afterwards because you know not having them take their cut out of organizing the shipping, and I've learned to do it, so it seems the
fair enough.
simplest way.
Does
We
it make a difference? Does it make a difference though that you now aren't they aren't insuring that box of games all the way to the UK warehouse?
Well, when you mentioned oh, I need to look at insurance now. I watched your video on Planet Smasher, I think, where you mentioned that in passing. I did have a slight smile because whether you're aware or not, you've been on my public liability insurance at various conventions for the last like 5 years.
Mm,
So I've got like product liability, public liability. Before I started launched anything, I went to my accountant and I said, "What should I know and what should I do?" And he said,
mm,
"Get proper insurance
hmm.
and then some other things." And so I went and got fairly comprehensive insurance that covers for like a whole bunch of stuff. So
Yeah,
I am technically insured for the cost of the thing if it goes missing at some point in the intermodal shipping. I think it's something that's it, one thing that's interesting to me is I went to an insurer and I was like, I want product liability and public liability insurance, and they went away
mm,
and they went, oh, public liability is just included. Product liability is like a higher order sort of insurance, and your public liability, you can't have product without public, so it's
right,
sort of contained in. And they were like,
right,
so yeah, there's a bunch of things we pre-include because product liability insurance is such a higher order level of insurance. But
yeah.
that all gets a bit sort of technical. There is
Well,
there
no, but I mean, like, so one of the things about product liability insurance, particularly, is that like um, there's a risk calculation around the product that you're making and putting in the world, whereby if you are making a hardback book, that's a very low risk product. It's very well understood. It's very difficult to damage yourself with it. If I'm putting a box of like sharp edged metal bottle caps in a thing with some like chewable, swallowable tokens or whatever, like my product's liability risk changes significantly. And therefore like the risk that I need to consider, the premiums of my insurance, the necessity of taking insurance, the necessity of thinking about limiting my own liability through other mechanisms, like
Mm.
you know it just there's a reason why being a book publisher is a very different game to being like a box
Yeah.
of like a toy manufacturer or something.
And I think this is one of the things that a lot of people again will say about launching a Kickstarter is that you can be a game designer and you can find a publisher and then you are just a game designer. If you
Hmm.
launch a Kickstarter, you are now you are now running a business,
Yeah.
and you open yourself up to all of the things involved in running a business. And I think one of the things about doing Kickstarter is that you get a lot bunch of small independent creatives who are like, but I'm a tiny guy and I'm just putting out like 100 things into the world. And it's like, yeah, but you're doing it through a platform that opens you up to millions and millions of people seeing your product all around the world.
Mm.
And that's an exchange. We live in an internet age where suddenly a tiny little nobody has amazing access to billions of people, which is great.
Mm.
It's like creatively fantastic. It lets you do incredibly niche things and get it out to the weird spread of fans dotted around the globe. But your payback for doing that is you are now shipping things to hundreds of different countries that
Mm.
have different tax, regulations and customs regulations and safety regulations, and you pay for the access that you're getting by dealing with all of that regulation stuff.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not getting nothing for doing that. Sometimes it feels like this is unfair. I'm just little Jimmy 50 copies of my little game, and it's like, well, yeah, you can print your game, you can roll up at conventions, you can only ever deal with people face to face. That's an option. It's always been available. And if you don't want to be a business owner and deal with what involves being a internationally, sort of launched business,
Mm.
that's fine. That's great. People will play your game. You'll make some money. Once you open that floodgate, you accept like all the things that come out of Pandora's box with it. I think.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that that's part of the journey that I'm on right now, is that like um and this is a little bit complicated for me as well, because I actually think I might be able to get to self-sustaining without direct sales in sort of 3 or 4 years if I get a good pipeline of publisher-backed projects. What I'm trying to do is connect the dots between there and here. And so it might be that like I want to do some direct sales for a bit, but then it's not like I'm not setting up Planet Smasher games as like for the next 10 years I'm going to be creating a schedule of my own products, launching them direct. It might end up that way, but like it might not. And so I guess part of this journey is complicated by the fact that like if I was just a straight arrow that was pointed in the direction of, becoming a publisher, even if it's just for my own games and putting out product regularly in the world, keeping a catalog of those games and selling them, that would be one thing. But like wanting to do a couple of sort of almost like limited run projects in order to make a bit of cash, and then this closes down, it brings to bear some questions about like the decisions that I'm making around the long-term nature of that, or like setting up administrative overhead for myself that will last for a long time, that I actually would prefer not to, and so forth. I mean, this comes to limited liability question, which is, I'm currently a sole trader, should I create a limited company in the UK in order to house this stuff? One of the insurers I was talking to was like, do it tomorrow, like blah blah blah. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm a sole trader, and that's based on a few conversations with my accountant. Um, yeah, I think like the sort of analogy I would use in relation to, oh, I'll set these things up and then I'll let them, go after a little while, is I had a conversation with a friend ages ago about cooking Chinese food at home. And he was like, "Well, I got the recipe, and then I went out and I got all the things. It was incredibly expensive. It cost us a fortune. Why would I ever like choose to cook it at home?" And it's like, well, it costs a lot of money because you've got enough spices all in one go to cook like 500 Chinese dinners, because you can't buy spices in like single use packets. You have to buy them in these jars and things. And it's like, the first meal that you cook is going to cost you like 100 quid. The second one is going to cost you like £2.50, because you've already got all that stuff there. And it's
Yeah.
like the first internationally shipped product that you put out into the world is going to be like pulling teeth. The second
Yeah,
one,
it's not just money, it's all the things you have to learn, it's the
yeah,
questions you have to soul search for the answers to. It's, it's a big lift.
yeah, the second one is like, I am so lackadaisical about launching Kickstarters now. I am so just like, yeah, I'll stick it up then. You know, I've done all the reading. I've been through the process. I know
Right.
the intermodal shipping logistics people. I know the production factory. I'm so casual about it at this point, just because I've been through that pain several times.
Mm.
And this is one of the things where I say to several people, make your first Kickstarter where you ship a physical product small. Make it, willfully make it, a smaller thing, because that process is going to be painful, whatever
Yeah.
size you do it at the first time you do it.
Mm.
And then, when you are shipping out 1,000 or 2,000 on your second or third or fourth Kickstarter or whatever, make it your second or third Kickstarter, because all of that pain, in a small dose for like 100 or 200 copies, is then going to be gone. You're going to be through it, and doing it at 1,000 is actually, not that much more of a sort of a logistical difficulty when you do it
Mm.
sort of later on. I said a few times, try and screw up where only a few people are going to see you, because you're going to screw up something. And who knows what it's going to be,
Mm.
but something's going to get screwed up. And then you can screw it up once, and then you can, like, play the violin in public rather than learning it in public. um
So talking about logistics, so we can maybe move on to the next part of the chain, which is the fulfillment part of things. So like having manufactured something, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the EU, whether it's in China, the next leg of this journey is like, well, number one, if you've got multiple things, how do they get combined together, and who's doing the picking of items and putting them in a box? And then number two is like, how are they getting shipped to the individual backers? And then, and then all of the stuff that comes as a result of that, of like, how are you making sure that, the backer basically isn't getting stung with additional costs as the package arrives with a dirty great note on the front of it saying you can have it, but you have to pay, 40 euros or something before you get access to it. So then this part of the conversation might end up being a sort of not sponsored advert for Games Quest, because that's who I'm talking to, and I think that's who you use. So we can maybe
yep.
talk about some other people that we've spoken to. But yeah, like the idea that there is a bunch of fulfillment challenges and there are companies out there that have already solved these challenges for people that are shaped exactly like Mike and Glenn is awesome. And that is a thing that I am willing to pay good money for.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there are multiple so just so that we can be fair, I guess.
Journalistic integrity.
In And this is in relation to being, so UK, the Spiral Galaxy are very good. Zatu are very good. Like you say, Games Quest. I believe the popular one in Germany, I want to say they're called Happy Shopper. It really sounds sort of kind of, it's an oddly naff name. Quartermaster Logistics is, the big boy in the US, and that's the only US one I'm aware of because I haven't particularly looked into using fulfillment companies in the US. Aetherworks are a fulfillment company that have, and a lot of these companies have branches in different places. So, GamesQuest has a German warehouse. Aetherworks has Australian, American, EU hubs. I imagine Quartermaster has got hubs in other countries. I haven't looked into it. I can't imagine that the size they are, they don't. And so several of them will have hubs in different countries, which gives you an option to, deal with customs via another route. But yeah, there's loads of these companies who literally professionally deal with Kickstarter game creators. And I've self-fulfilled. I fulfilled with GamesQuest. I fulfilled with a fulfillment and warehousing company who do not deal with Kickstarters and game companies. Just because my first shot at fulfillment, I was like, who's available?
Mm.
And they hit me up. I would strongly suggest, if you're going to go fulfillment, go for one of the people like GamesQuest who have been through Kickstarter and know that, because it is a genuinely different set of requirements. So most fulfillment companies are going to be like drop shipping, warehousing companies, where they expect you to have an area in their warehouse and orders come in and they ship it like put one at a time. And it's not to say that they fulfilled my Kickstarter, within like 12 hours of the orders coming in. They're still well set up for it, but they have different expectations on like,
Right, because Kickstarters are so weirdly spiky. There's
yeah,
like one massive spike of delivery and then the thing is over. Like it's just a strange looking
yeah.
project from
And and a lot of
a
those
normal like
companies,
distributed product.
yeah, and a lot of those companies also offer a suite of things. So GameQuest have advertising that they can do for you. They can put you in touch with distribution methods, and just distributors, distributors are a whole other thing. It's like tracking back to what you were saying about, it's the difference of £1.50 this way or the other. Distribution is going to expect to buy your game at like 33% of its ticket price. And so like £1.50 when you're selling like retail, it doesn't seem that much. When you're doing 33%, £1.50 becomes a
£4
£4.50
50. Yeah.
increase in the final ticket price of the game. And again, that's sort of like, if you're going into distribution, if you're going to retail, these calculations shift and change as you go along.
Yeah, and so like from my perspective, like walking into this initially, I was thinking, look, I don't want a massive pile of boxes in my house. I don't want to have to sort through, 300, 500, 1,000 backers, like unique mixture of things in order to get their order correctly. I don't even necessarily want to have to deal with the customer service of when I mess that up. I don't want to deal with shipping internationally because it's confusing and it's complicated and it's time consuming. And I would like some help from somebody who knows how value added tax works in the various regions where it needs to be worried about, which I hadn't even realized is basically just the EU, and almost no other country has this set of like, well, if you bring stuff into our country, you have to pay VAT. So all of that was sort of why I was saying, oh, well, I'm going to go to a fulfillment company because I don't want to deal with any of those things. And then it turns out that there are companies like GamesQuest who specialize in this stuff and can add all these other things on top, which is super, super good and really exciting for me. Particularly tracking back to the beginning of the conversation in the last episode, like one of the early parts of this journey was trying to set up a e-commerce web store and realizing how complicated shipping and tax collection and just in general how irritating running a web store is, because I did it when Gaslands launched back in 2017. I kind of ran a little rinky-dink eBay-based e-commerce thing so that I could get the game off the ground. And that was a pain in my ass, and I hated it, but it was fine, and it was what the game needed. But someone like a fulfillment company that has both warehousing space, pick and pack ability, and some kind of platform that lets you either manually import orders or connect your thing. So, we were speaking to Etherworks about this exact thing. I'm sure Zatu offers it. Games Quest certainly does. So not only could I fulfill my Kickstarter through a company like this, by building a relationship, I can pay some amount of money monthly to like warehouse some stuff that I own, that like suddenly, having these zines that I was sad that I could get printed really inexpensively here in Canterbury, but I couldn't get to anyone. Like, brilliant. Now I can make a box of Perilous Tales. I can give it to one of these fulfillment companies. And when someone orders a Perilous Tales, I can type in an order and get the damn thing shipped to them, which is very
Yeah.
exciting as well. So there's like knock-on benefits of like, as a business trying to scale up a little bit of direct sales, they can help me with the Kickstarter delivery, but then the Kickstarter doesn't have to be the end of the journey, because I can keep a stock of Space Gits, I can add a stock of Perilous Tales, and that for me is like, that starts to open up the next couple of years of, oh wow, I can actually sell games directly, and that is going to be the way that I can, significantly increase like this part of like direct sales that I was planning to make, some proportion of my, paying my mortgage and my kids' food. Like, this becomes much more feasible and much more kind of the time that I have to invest, the money that they're charging for that service, I haven't checked all of the services comparatively, but like, I'm getting a real strong sense that this is great value for small creators.
Yeah, and it really depends, because obviously every single one of those things that somebody else is doing you for, you're paying a percentage for
Yeah,
them.
and you could learn to do yourself, or you could put the hours in.
Yeah, and I think particularly like the ongoing process of like essentially drop shipping with them, and paying the warehousing, and paying the ongoing bills. The obvious question there is, how many units do you shift a week, a month,
Mm.
and how much is that monthly bill? And there's a fairly sort of obvious, simple mathematical calculation there that has very little to do with like, but it's less work for me, and
But
very much to do.
it's also a really easy thing to drive directly. So, having access to an audience, whether it's through email distribution, whether it's through, YouTube, whether it's through, other social platforms, like, because it's a direct relationship, I can do a video that says like,
Mm.
here's how to play Perilous Tales, and that will result in sales. Or I can send an email out that says, hey, did you know that Perilous Tales is now available, internationally to order, blah blah blah. Like, it's a button that I can push. Like, it's not, 1 + 1 = 2, but like, if I need to sell, 10 copies of Perilous Tales a month to cover the like standing charges of the warehousing and stuff, then that can be a little goal to myself, and I can say, well, like, I'm going to create like the minimum amount of content or messaging that's going to drive, that sort of sales.
Mm. And
So yeah.
yeah, I think it's very much how you react to that equation. Like
Yeah.
you say, this is a goal for myself, and it's like, either you're like, okay, it's a goal for myself. I have to sell 10 copies a month. That's going to drive me forward. Yeah. Or
Mm,
you're like, I don't make money until I sell the 11th one. I have to sell 10 every month.
mm,
Every month I've got to go out there and I've got to sell 10 more copies, or I am losing money.
mm.
Or you might be like, no, what I want is every copy. If I sell one copy a month, I've made some money. If I sell, 20, I've made some money. If I made zero, I've lost no money. And like, if you're self-fulfilling and if you are your own warehouse, it's that sort of, every single copy that goes into the post is putting money in my pocket.
Mm.
Whereas if you are dealing with the warehousing, it's like being on a job again, like being, I've worked commission telesales where you've got to hit a certain number,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's and
I
it,
mean, the other thing that's a consideration from my perspective, and we can talk about this when there's a whole episode on like tiers and add-ons and how you structure the thing. But like, I've got quite a lot of potential product that I could list on my web store. So like, in a little area in a fulfillment company's warehouse, I could have like, a box of Hobgoblin, a box of Gaslands Refueled, like a box, 3 or 4 boxes of different zines, 6 or 8 different zines. Like, so individually, does Perilous Tales need to make its little warehousing space? No, probably not. There's a nice mix of things, and like, could I sell 10 copies of Hobgoblin or Refueled directly from my website a month? Like that seems like a much easier sell than like, can I sell like 10 copies of my like weird little flicking heck zine?
Yeah, and I think then the other thing you get into there is it's a different sort of logistics where you're like, you've got SKUs with the warehouse or the fulfillment company, and you have to keep those SKUs in stock.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep ahead of stocking it from the manufacturer to the warehouse, but you don't want to overstock the warehouse because then you're going to be charged for warehouse space. I'm
Which is
not.
what Kickstarter's so good about, because it eliminates all of that by just crunching it into like, okay, everybody say now, put your hand up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like when I've done fulfillment, it's been the stuff arrives, it gets fulfilled, my stuff is out the warehouse, within days of it coming into the warehouse. And so again, I think a lot of this is sort of pays you money and you takes your choice. And I think it's worth talking about pledge manager integration in relation to that as well. But I notice this conversation is running to a chunky length, so we might come back to that in the next conversation. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
if you're watching this video, I assume you are familiar with Kickstarter and independent game launches thereon. So why not swing down to the comment section? Let us know sort of which independent games you might have kickstarted and how was your experience with having it fulfilled and having it available post Kickstarter. A lot of people I see sort of say, oh, I'll wait until the Kickstarter's over and then I'll just buy it on retail. And it's like, not always an option from every producer and manufacturer. Have you done that in the past and then missed out and found the thing unavailable? Did you care? Was it just FOMO? All these things and more in the comments section. Hit the like and subscribe while you're down there. And then in the down below linky bit in between here and there, there's a set of links. One of them will be across to a landing page for Space Gits, which is the
Yeah.
Kickstarter game that this series of conversations is in relation to. There'll be a link across to our Discord where you can come over and chat. There's a whole subsection thing for kickstarting and small publishers in the Discord, so you can go and chat in there if this is something you're contemplating. And swing by our Patreons. Support Mike in this journey to do his kickstarting by funding the development directly, or swing by our websites and e-commerce platforms that we are on, that there are links to as well, and buy something direct to us and fund the warehousing of games that that is being discussed. But for now, I think from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it'll be thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
Cheers. Bye bye.